talks. Ranka?
Yeah, good morning, everybody. So, as you have seen, those who have participated in part one, we arranged or organized our webinar series on aquaponics, aquaculture, and hydroponics in 2 parts, also according to the semester. So you also get, if you are always with us each time, you get like 2 certificates. And this second part will delve more into some themes that we already have started in the first part, but more in depth. Next slide, please. So who is with you today? For those who are new, it's Dr. Zala Schmautz, which you saw. She's leader of this project, and she is assisted by myself. I am actually originally when I studied, I was a freshwater scientist, but then later I changed my specialization into aquaponics, soilless cultivation. And Zala and I work together now for nearly 10 years, Zala. Do you know that?
Yeah, I know. It goes fast.
Yes, it goes really fast. And yeah, so the other, next slide, the other important people in this project is Luna, which we will show. So Luna Al-Hadidi, she's the first on the left up. So there is, we will lead together this project, which is also connected to the Front Agri Nexus project, which is financed by Prima in Northern African Mediterranean countries. But during the entire webinar, you will meet all kinds of other experts. We met already all these who are on the picture here, like Elisa Apolloni, and then I'm just going from left to right, from above to down. Then Michael Reuter, Emmanuel Benjamin, it's Ben. Luca Regazzoni will be coming, Ingo Blaser, Linda Chirn, Carlos Espinal. Who is this?
Silver.
Oh, it's such a special picture of him that I didn't recognize him. And Maurice Villarroel, who is our partner from University of Madrid, and who is also with us in this ELISA University Alliance. Maybe you go back, Zala, and there will be several more which you meet. So I will show the webinar program and what is this about ELISA Alliance and recognition system. Then Zala will talk about soilless plant cultivation today, about plant growth requirements, what do plants need, nutrient needs of plants, also nutrient deficiencies, what happens to plants if they don't get what they need and want, how do we remedy these nutrient deficiencies with supplementation, and then there is also a little homework should you want to accept this mission, and conclusions. So this entire seminar will have again 7 webinars. The next one will be on plant monitoring and IPM, integrated pest management. I will do that. Then we'll have a webinar on balancing of aquaponics by Michael Reuter. Then we'll have one on pond aquaculture by Luca Regazzoni, who worked for a long time with the Cambodia projects and has ample experience with pond aquaculture. Then again, twice Michael on improving nutrient use efficiency in systems and on energy and business aspects. And then we'll have kind of final discussion, questions, wrap up, repetition. Be sure to prepare all kinds of open questions that you have and ask them. We think that we don't need special preparation for questions. You just ask and we'll answer the best we can. Whatever we don't want, we'll research and come back to you later. Next slide. What is ELISA Alliance? In Europe, there are over 1,000 universities. And there are also inter-university programs where the exchange of students can be organized, like Erasmus, and Switzerland has their own program because they are not part of Erasmus and so on. But in later years now, university tried to make this exchange more smooth and more easy and to make some more synergies between universities. So there are several alliances of European university in Europe. And ELISA is one of these alliances. There are now about 50 alliances. And this alliance is especially focuses on engineering. So it is meant to define and implement a common model of European engineer, which is rooted in society, which is precisely the focus of our Institute of Natural Resource Sciences within the Zürcher Hochschule für angewandte Wissenschaften. So we are part of this alliance of 10 European universities from Hungary, France, Germany, Turkey, Italy, Romania, and Spain. And the goal of this alliance is not only to define this common model of European engineering, but also to provide joint educational materials so that the students can also online or in person very easily go to summer schools or go to such webinars. And then there is a system of recognition which is based on the SDGs. Next slide. So the student involvement in these learning experiences offered by ELISA communities is kind of is ELISA recognition system, and you get badges. On the other hand, you also get ECTS, but for stuff that is micro credentials, which is less than ECTS, you get credential badge levels, and there are different levels. So the two levels that you can get with this webinar is either level discovery or level knowledge. We don't do, if you go back in this webinar, we don't do commitment, action, and transformation because you don't do that at this moment, because a webinar is purely theoretical. The other levels are more like practical. So now the next slide. And that's how the certificate looks like. Below, that's what you get in the end. And we issue 2 levels of badge in this course. Level 1 is you do 100% attendance. You attend all 7 webinars. You can substitute one webinar by watching the video afterwards and submitting the homework. On the other hand, if you want the level badge, level 2, the knowledge, then you need to submit all the homeworks to the organizer. This will be announced each week. So if you do just one homework and you are here all the time, you get level 1 discovery. And if you do all homeworks and you are here all the time, then you do level 2, you get level 2 knowledge. And yeah, that's the certificate. Next one. So I actually told you about the experts, and now we go over to Zala. I give over to Zala for the plant growth requirements and nutrient deficiencies. At the same time, I will also follow, because Zala can do both, I will follow the chat. So if you have questions within her lecture, you can post them on the chat, and in the end I will reread these questions if I can't perhaps even answer them immediately in the chat, and we can then discuss them afterwards. So
Perfect.
over to you, Zala.
Thank you very much. So like Ranka said, every webinar you will get your homework. I will try maybe a day or 2 after the webinars we have. I will send you an email with the recording of the webinar, so you can rewatch it if something is not clear, and also with the instructions for the homework, to whom to send it, and the instructions itself. But now let's go to the plant growth requirements and nutrient deficiencies. So there are two different ways of look at it. The most important part is that since this webinar, it's mainly focused on aquaponics, I will also try to look at it from the aquaponics perspective. It's quite a big field. We do not have a lot of time. So I will just try to do my best to lead you through it. And at the end, give you also some additional literature if you're interested into this topic. And just to quickly recap, there were a few things already that Elisa told on the last webinar. So why hydroponic systems? So we grow plants without soil. They are cultivated in water-based systems in nutrient-rich solution. You can also use some substrates if needed. And the main important part is that the roots receive the balanced mixture of those nutrients directly from the water source, or maybe some small amounts also for the substrates. They are different systems that you could use to a bit more bigger systems, but still homemade, to really a big production systems. So I will try to focus the stuff that we are doing, that we are somewhere here, because for this part, the knowledge has to be much, much higher. But if you have any questions, just ask. So just to quickly to recap, why the soilless cultivation of plants? When we talk about the comparison between soil and soilless plant cultivation, of course, the first thing that we think it's the grow medium, right? So in soilless, we use water, we do not use any soil. When we talk about the nutrient delivery, in soilless cultivation, this comes directly from the water source. Then we have the water usage, because the systems are often closed. The systems are much more efficient. They use up to 90% less water, because the water that you add is the water that actually gets used by plants directly, and not so much gets evaporated. When we talk about the plant growth rate, normally in hydroponics and also some kinds of aquaponics, the plants grow faster because we deliver them exactly what they need, so they can really maximize their growth. There's also a space efficiency, because they have more nutrients, they can be stacked vertically as well. We also optimize that part. Same goes for the environmental control. Normally those systems are closed, meaning it's easier to control it. Goes for air, ventilation, temperature, and also just for the shading if you have the greenhouses. When we talk about the pests and disease control, some things are also much easier in soilless plant cultivation, because a lot of things comes with soil-borne diseases, which this is not the case in the hydroponic systems. And due to all these prawns that I mentioned now, the yields are normally higher because we give the optimal condition to the plant, so the plants also produce more. However, just because we were talking about positive stuff, there are also some negative ones. For example, for the energy requirement, systems like this, because they are run as they are, you still need pumps, you need the, some artificial lighting, climate control, and so on. The energy requirements will be higher. When we talk about the sustainability, it's always a big question, so it really depends who you ask. Sometimes the systems soil-based are more sustainable, but also the soilless cultivations can be sustainable if run properly, especially in case of aquaponics, where you take the waste of one industry to feed your plants. So actually you feed the plants with the waste of other industry, right? And one thing that it's much higher when we talk about the soilless cultivation are initial setup costs, right? While in soil you put your plants in, maybe you have to add a bit of fertilizer and buy your plants. When you talk about the hydroponics, normally you have to buy some equipment or some channels or the pumps and so on. Same goes for the maintenance. Yes, it requires a bit more maintenance, and especially documentation is extremely important here, right? That you can follow up what was done and that it's done regularly. When it comes to the crop varieties, there are some crop varieties that are more fit to the soilless cultivation systems, and especially because you can make more money with it or they grow faster. For example, growing potatoes or wheat in soilless cultivation systems, it's really not cost beneficial. And environmental impact. Here there are again some positive and negative aspects when we talk about the soilless cultivation. Because we are running the systems in the closed way, there is no runoff of the system. So there is no erosion, there is no nutrient leaching from the system. So we can, with these systems, also protect the environment. However, because we use more energy, sometimes you can say that also the CO2 costs are higher, depending from your energy source. And what kind of systems do we actually talk about? So Elisa already mentioned some of them last week, but I just wanted quickly to recap. There are different soilless cultivation systems, and when we talk about the aquaponics, a lot of them can be connected together with the aquaponics system. So the most commonly used are media bed systems. Those are the systems that normally you use in your backyard, but I would not say that those are the systems that you would use on the big commercial scales, because having so much substrate also comes with some cons, meaning that you would have to clean the substrate regularly, which causes a lot of workload. But they are really good for small systems that you use in your backyard. Then we have the deep water culture. So the plants are grown in a deeper water, and they take the nutrients directly up of the water. However, in these systems, you also have to provide oxygen into the water, that the plants have enough oxygen for their development. Then we have the NFT channels, which are that you can use also some pipes or the square channels, depending what you have. Here, the oxygen problem is resolved with a big surface area. However, you have a problem if, for example, your pump stops working, then you can come to the problem that your plants will get dry because they will not have water anymore. So this constant monitoring of the system is really important. Then you have the drip irrigation system. Drip irrigation system is also quite commonly used in the industry, where you deliver the exact amount of water that the plants need directly to the plant with a drip system. So you deliver what the plants need. This is how often the tomatoes or strawberries are grown in any commercial system. And then you also have some others which are not so commonly used, aeroponics or phocoponics. There are some industries and some people that really like to use ebb and flow systems, but then you need a bit more space, because sometimes you have a lot of water, sometimes you have really little water, so the storage for the water has to be a bit bigger. And then, of course, you have also deep flow technique, which is a mixture of the deep water culture and the nutrient film technique. So now let's go to the plant growth requirements. What could our plants need to grow? There are a few parameters that we really have to look at, and we have to make sure that they're well if we want for our plants to grow well. So normally we talk about light, we talk about the space to grow, gases from the air, so ventilation and air movements and so on, correct temperature, nutrients, and water. And now we go step by step, and I will lead you through. So without light, we will not have any plants, right? So the most important part is the light. It's not only a crucial factor in hydroponics, but in any kind of plant cultivation. It's important for the growth and also for the yield. We have different wavelengths that are important for the growth, but there is still quite a lot of research that has to be done. So normally we talk about our visual spectrum, that also plants use, meaning somewhere in the range of photosynthetically active radiation, which is PAR, when we talk about the wavelengths between 400 and 700 nanometers. However, the plants use also something outside of this range. They also use the far red light, which is into this direction, into the direction of infrared, as well as UV, because UV is sometimes important, especially when you're producing aromatic plants to produce more oils. So they are using the whole red spectrum. However, for their growth, they really require this blue and red light, right? But in different ratios, depending on what you would like to do. There's also a big difference between the plants that we want to cultivate, right? Normally, the house plants have quite low light requirement. If you just look at it that way, those house plants that we normally use in our houses are the plants that you quite often have somewhere in the corner, right? And those are the plants that would come somewhere from the jungle in the middle of the floor where there was not enough light. So there is a bit of light, but they don't need much. When we talk about lettuce needs a bit more light, somewhere around 200 to 400. But be careful on the units, because some of the times the units are reported differently. So when you check these values, just make sure that we are talking about exactly the right units. Then we have the tomatoes. You can see that compared to the lettuce, tomatoes need much more light. And just for the comparison, here are two values that normally how much light you would get if you put on at 12, you measure the light, right? So this is the highest peak during the day. And in summer, at least in Europe, you would get the somewhere around 2000, while in winter only 1200. But this is at really peak, right? Then what kind of light sources we have? We have the natural light. So we have the sunlight, which is in most cases the most useful and the most commonly used light source. However, if we do not have enough light, there are also some options that you can supplement the natural light, or you just grow the plants indoors. Meaning, first we have the LEDs. They are really energy efficient. You can customize them on the spectrum, and they also have a long lifespan. The good benefit of the LEDs, it's also they do not produce so much heat compared to others, but this does not mean that they do not produce heat. They still produce quite some heat, but they are the most energy efficient lights on the market at the moment. Then we have the high intensity discharge lights. They are strong lights. Normally they are used in the big greenhouses, where you put them somewhere on the top, high above the plants, but they produce quite some heat. And then, of course, you have also fluorescence lights. They have the low energy consumption, and they are ideal for seedlings or for the smaller plants. When we talk about light, we do not only talk about do we have light, do we don't have light, what kind of light we have, but we also talk about the intensity and the distance from the light source. Why is this important? Is the intensity itself. You can harm the plants if you give them too much or too little, right? So if you give them more light, it also promotes the growth. However, if you give them too little light, they will, of course, not be happy. And when we talk about the distance from the light source, if we have the light that produces a lot of heat and we put it too close, the plants will get burned, meaning that you will not have the high quality plants at the end. And while the plants are growing, it's good also that you adapt the height. So, or you're moving the plants, or you're moving the light, or you are changing your light settings on the way that they fit again to the plants. You don't have to do that every day, but normally you do that in 2-3 stages. So quite often in industry, it's done on the way that you have different lights for the seedling stage, and then the plants are moved to another place where the lights are then adapted for the grow out. I would say it that way. Then we have air and CO2, right? So first we have the light, but if we do not provide the good aeration to the plants, all that light will just get lost because the plants cannot breathe. Oxygen is essential also for the roots. So it's not only we talk about gases when it comes to the air, but also what's in the water. And of course, for the transpiration, carbon dioxide, which is crucial for the photosynthesis. And when we talk about the ventilation and air circulation, they are other options, right? So if we have our aquaponics system outside, the nature will do its part, right? There will be a bit of wind, there will be a bit of shadow sometimes. So maybe sometimes if it's really hot, you will have to shade it. But in other cases, having systems outside the nature will do its part. However, when we move inside, it's, of course, as we call it, greenhouse effect, right? So it's really important how you also design your greenhouse, and you cannot just cover the greenhouse and keep the greenhouse closed. You can see on all these three pictures at the bottom, you can see that they are windows on the top of the greenhouses. Even if you build a small greenhouse, it's always good that you have somewhere an opening on the top where the hot air can escape, right? And what you try to do is make sure that you have quite a big volume of air in the greenhouse, which prevents this hot air inside the greenhouse. You can see here in this middle picture quite well that if the greenhouse is low, it will accumulate a lot of hot air, especially if you do not have any openings on the roof, right? There are also other options that you can implement, but of course they require bigger energy source as well as higher costs. It's, for example, implementing the ventilation in the systems, just something that breathes or changes a bit more airflow in the room, that you make sure that the air is really good also in the plant canopy. It's not only important that the air is good above the plant level, but the most important part is that the air is good in the plant canopy so that the plants can use the good air again. Because if the air gets stuck here, then the plants cannot have a good air or they cannot use it anymore. Then we come to the air temperature. And also here it really depends what kind of plants we have and how we adapt this air temperature, right? When we talk about the leafy greens, so from microgreens to salads to also herbs, they prefer a bit lower temperature, so somewhere between 16 to 24 degrees. While when we are talking about the fruiting plants, such as tomatoes and chilies, they prefer a bit higher temperature, somewhere between 21 and 29 degrees. If we go out of those ranges, we can cause a lot of stress to the plants, affecting the growth and also the yields. And of course, this also has the effect on how fast the plants will grow. There are also differences between different herbs, for example. Basil would prefer a bit warmer climates, while coriander would prefer a bit lower climate, cooler climates. But sometimes we would like to keep the climate a bit cooler because we would like to slow down the growth or maybe prevent flowering. So it really depends on your wishes. And when we work indoors, there is also an important part. It's not that just that we keep the temperature stable, but that we also offer the plants that there is a bit of difference in the temperature between night and day. Meaning that what we normally do is we drop the temperature during the night, somewhere between 3 to 6 degrees, to mimic the natural conditions. The same as happens in nature naturally. If you do it in the greenhouses, you mean that you try to aerate a bit more, but if you go indoor, you really have to make sure that there is this difference between day and night temperature. Now we come to the water quality. So we said that the most of the nutrients, everything comes from the water source, right? So this really impacts the nutrient availability, plant health, and the growth rates, right? So the water quality in general, it's extremely, extremely important. Already before I mentioned the oxygen, and if we want that our plants are growing well, we have to make sure that the oxygen levels in the water are at the good rates, right? So what do I mean with the good rate is around, I would say, if we talk about milligrams per liter, we have to be above 5 milligrams per liter in the water, or 70% if we are talking about the oxygen saturation. This is especially in the aquaponic systems, because if you, for example, have a system and you have catfish or tilapia in the system, they can survive also the oxygen as low as 2 milligrams per liter without problem. However, your plants will not be happy. So you have to make sure that even though maybe your fish do not need it, the plants as well as bacteria need a bit higher levels, right? So this oxygenation part in the root zone is extremely important. And when we talk about the water quality, there's also a part where we have the water source. So from where we get our water. Quite often the tap water is used, but here we have to be careful because quite often there is chloride in the water. So it's good if you aerate the water before you add it to the system. There are some more precise ways of doing it. Industry normally uses filtered water, meaning there is no nutrients in the water. But when we talk about the home systems or the systems that are half commercial, sometimes this is, I would say, especially in aquaponics, it's not such a good idea, because also with the tap water, you get some other nutrients, right? You get calcium and magnesium inside, while with the filter water, you remove all these nutrients and you work with nothing, meaning they're also for the plants, they will not get those nutrients. And when we talk about the rainwater, you have to be careful because sometimes pH is a bit different. And if you just always take the rainwater directly from the roof and you do not flush the roof before you start collecting your water, also some contaminants, especially heavy metals, can occur in rainwater, which will be then absorbed by the plants. Then we have the pH, right? So one of the most important parameters that we talk about in aquaponics is the pH. And I said that we will try to look with this water quality a bit more from the aquaponic perspective and not so much only from hydroponics. So normally in hydroponics, you would like to keep the pH somewhere between 5.5 to 6.5. While in aquaponics, we go a bit higher. So normally we keep the pH somewhere between 6.5 to 7.5. And the main reason for that, it's actually that in aquaponics, we do not focus only on plants, but we also focus on the fish as well as on bacteria. And bacteria as well as fish prefer a bit higher pH. So to make all of them comfortable, we try to have middle grounds between what the plants like and what the fish and bacteria like. The reason why the pH is so important is because the pH affects the nutrient solubility and availability of different nutrients, right? So if the pH is too high, some nutrients will not be available to the plants. Same goes if the pH is too low. So that's why this keeping it stable and also in the right range, it's extremely, extremely important. And some of the nutrients also keep the buffer, meaning that the pH is a bit more stable. So for example, calcium can also keep a bit buffer a bit higher, right? And when we talk about the water temperature, it's not only about the air temperature that it's important, but also the water temperature. Because when we talk about the temperature of the water, if the water temperature is too high, also pathogens like it a bit more. So normally you try to keep the water temperature a bit lower compared to the air temperature, right? So when we talk about it, depending on the plants that you're growing, if you would like to avoid some big contaminations with fungi, especially, you try to keep the water temperature below 22 degrees. When you have a homemade system, this is, I would say, it's the easiest way to do it is that you make sure that your sump, it's maybe underground, so you have it in the soil, surrounded with the soil, so that you have the temperatures of the water a bit lower. In the industries and a bit bigger systems, you can also use chillers. And in the cold climates, also sometimes you heat up the nutrient solution. What I normally do, especially if I do not want to heat up the whole greenhouse at the beginning of the season, sometimes I just heat up the water temperature a bit more. to start the germination process. So the water and seedlings are warm, but I do not heat up the whole greenhouse to, for example, 25 degrees for some seedlings of the herbs. And when we talk about water quality, there is another really important one. It's electrical conductivity. It's quite easy to measure. Normally you have just the meter that you put into the water to measure the conductivity itself. It measures dissolved salts in the water. Unfortunately for this method, it's a good approximation that you know what's happening in the system, but with knowing the electrical conductivity, you will not know which nutrient is missing or which nutrient you have in excess. Meaning it gives you a good idea what's happening in the system, but you cannot determine what exactly is wrong if you just measure the electrical conductivity and the pH. When we talk about the hydroponics, we normally target the conductivity somewhere between 1 to 3 millisiemens per centimeter, while in aquaponics, somewhere between 1 to 1.8 millisiemens per centimeter. When the conductivity would be too high, you can also cause the nutrient burns on the leaves, so you damage the plants. And if it's too low, you actually cause the plants to not have enough nutrients, which then leads to the nutrient deficiencies. What you normally do in the aquaponic systems when it comes to the plants and to monitoring, you normally always measure the electrical conductivity and the pH. Those two, they give you really good estimation of what's happening in the system. But if you have a problem, you have to go a bit more in depth, especially when we talk about the nutrient. So now we go on nutrient part. So what are different kinds of nutrients, right? We have the essential plant nutrients, so the nutrients that plants require for their growth. Then we have the macronutrients, so those are the nutrients that are needed in greater amounts. Then we have micronutrients, nutrients that are needed in smaller amounts, but this does not mean that they are not important, it's just they are needed in a bit smaller amounts. And then we have also two different ways that I would not put them into the same categories, but when you talk about the nutrient deficiencies, they are really important. We have mobile nutrients and we have immobile nutrients. So some nutrients, so the mobile ones, are the ones that are able to move from one place of the plant to another place of the plant, right? But if you have the immobile nutrients, it's once they are fixed on specific part of the plant, they will not be able to go somewhere else. Even if they would be needed, they cannot move anymore. So when we talk about deficiencies, you have to know where to search for it. And that's why it's important that you know that they are those two categories of the plants. Then we have different macro and micronutrients. And of course, they are needed in different amounts. This table can help you later on that if you're searching for something, I try to write you down which nutrients are immobile, partly immobile, or mobile nutrients, right? And I like this graph a lot because it helps you to understand how much nutrients are actually needed. So when we talk about the carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, mostly 94% of the plant is built from those three, right? And then the blue part here is normally nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, sulfur, calcium, and magnesium. So those are macronutrients. While this small part here, that it takes up only 1%, and that's quite a lot already. It's boron, copper, iron, zinc, and so on. Those are the micronutrients. So you see that there is a really big difference about the amounts that the plants need, different kinds of nutrients. And I do not want to make it more complicated, but when it comes to the nutrients, sometimes and understanding the plants, it gets complicated, unfortunately. And not only that we have the nutrients and we just add them to the system, it's also important that we know how these nutrients interact with each other and how the plants can break them up. So for example, if we have one nutrient and actually we have too much of other nutrient, maybe the plant will not be able to take it up, meaning we have two different kinds of interactions. We have the synergetic effect, meaning we add one and then the second one will be absorbed more because both of them have a positive effect. Or we have antagonistic effect, meaning some nutrients will have a negative impact on each other. For example, if you check here, we have the nitrogen and molybdenum that have the simulating effect, right, on each other. So molybdenum has good effect of nitrogen, and for example, for phosphorus and magnesium, it goes both ways. But when we talk, for example, about the potassium and calcium, it's other way around. So if you add too much calcium, maybe potassium will not be taken up by the plants, right? So just adding up more nutrients, sometimes it's not beneficial. So you have to make sure that also the ratio between the nutrients are correct. And if you now remember when I said that the nutrients are mobile and immobile nutrients, right? When we talk about the nutrient deficiencies of different nutrients will appear at different stages of the plant. So some of nutrient deficiencies will appear in the new leaves, and some of the deficiencies will always appear in old leaves. And for some, maybe, because I said that there are also some that are partially immobile, maybe you will get the deficiency over the whole plant. So even with this, you can already quite quickly determine what kind of damages you have in the plant or if plants are missing something. But before we go to the nutrient deficiencies and you try to figure it out which nutrient is missing, there is one important step before that. So before you start saying, hey, my plant is missing that and that, you first have to eliminate any other causes, because sometimes when plants are stressed, they will show also some signs that they look different, but this is not caused by the nutrient deficiency, but it's maybe caused by some pests, right? So we have insects, mites, nematodes, diseases. Nematodes are especially the problem if you work in the soil, or maybe you take some substrate from the garden into your aquaponics system. Too much water, too little water, cold damage, pesticide damage, or air pollution. So first you have to eliminate all those before you say, hey, now I have a problem that is related to the plant nutrient deficiency. And the most common nutrient deficiencies, you can also often Google online. You say like, hey, okay, now I check where I think that it's that. I go online and I check if my plants look exactly the same as the pictures that I can find online. Here is a good example for tomato, for example, how it looks like if it misses some specific nutrients. You can see, for example, here with nitrogen, the plants look quite pale. Then with iron, they look also pale, but pale on different way, right? While when we talk about the potassium, you can see that the tips of the leaves are burned. So each deficiency will show in the plants on different way, because each nutrient has different function in the plant. And to help you to identify those nutrients, we often use somehow elimination scheme, where you can try to find out what kind of nutrient deficiencies you have. So what you normally do, you can see here that you have the old leaves, young leaves. So first you determine if the deficiency is in old leaves or if it's in young leaves. And what I see that the deficiency is in the whole leaves are yellowing, meaning, okay, I check it here. This would be, for example, a good example would be iron. Then you have the yellowing between the leaf wings, so that the whole leaf is slowly getting yellow. Then the stems not shortened or roasted. And then if you do not have any necrotic spots, this is normally a sign of iron deficiency. So they are different charts that you can use. online to lead you through to figure it out which nutrient is missing, especially if you do not have the resources to measure what exactly is in the water or to do any kind of chemical analysis. To help you even further, there are some websites online. A good example is from Yara, from the fertilizer company, where you have also the nutrient deficiencies with the pictures. So they try to explain you with the pictures what kind of nutrient deficiencies you have. It's not only for tomatoes, they also have some other nutrients and the plants that you can identify, and then you just check on their sim from all those pictures if how your plant looks the same as there. And now when we come to the identifying those deficiencies, there are different diagnostic tools that you can use. I mentioned before that quite often we have the pH testing, that it's quite important. That you keep your pH in the right range. This would be my first step, that you go, and it's one of the cheapest things that you can do. You can use the pH meter, or as well just with the pH indication paper or with the chemistry tests. Then the next step is electrical conductivity meter. And with the electrical conductivity, you have the general idea of what's my electrical conductivity. Maybe in general, your conductivity is too high or too low, meaning that, or you have to, if we talk about aquaponics, you have to add more fish feed or more feed or fish. And if there is too much, maybe you have to remove some water and replace it with the tap water. Then you also have quite a cheap option. It's that you use water test kits. There is a good kit that you have that I already mentioned when we were talking about the water quality parameters for the fish. There, for example, you also have, it's aquarium kit, but it gives you a first indication where can be the problem. And they also have test kits available for the calcium, magnesium, iron, and so on, because this is also everything that you have to test for the water quality in the aquarium. So this is one kit that you buy. I think it's around $250 if you take the bigger. Okay, so then you have two a bit more expensive options, and those are two options that are normally used with water quality. So you have two analyzers that are used in the commercial setting, and they are water quality analyzers where you send your samples to the laboratory, meaning you get the full spectrum of your nutrients, and they will tell you what exactly it's missing. They will give you the concentration, what exactly it's in your water. Unfortunately, this comes with costs, and also it's delayed, meaning those results you will not get immediately, but maybe in a week or 2 weeks. So if you wait too long, you might already have a problem before you get the results. And when we talk about the commercial growing, people are often using the leaf tissue analysis, which are also quite expensive. But this analysis gives you the option to figure it out if the plant is missing something before there is the problem. Because what you do, you take the plant sap, so you take the juice out of the leaves, which actually allows you to know what exactly is in the plant at that time. And often you can know if there is a problem before the problem would be visible to your eyes. But of course, those two methods are more expensive. So for any kind of home systems or smaller systems, having water test kits, electrical conductivity sensor, and the pH measuring device are the most important. However, there is even one more important than all of those. It's your eyes, that you really go daily to the system and you observe your plants. Because if you are not there for 3 days, even if we are talking about nutrient deficiencies or pests, you might already lose half of your plant just not being there. And when we talk about the plant's needs, you can find quite some values online for hydroponics, right? But when we talk about the aquaponics, there is normally no values what's good or what's bad. And when we see the values for hydroponics, normally those values are much higher compared to the values that you normally have in the aquaponics system. In aquaponics system, there is sometimes imbalance between the nutrients that are provided by fish and also the nutrients that would be required later on for the growth, because we said that some plants have different nutrient requirements between the growth stages, and also sometimes between the different plant species, right? So lettuce needs way less nutrients compared to the tomato. But in aquaponics, because we have the constant supplementation of nutrients with the fish, these concentrations can be lower. And at the same time, we also have the microorganisms that are helping the plants to take up those nutrients. So do not worry if you see that in your aquaponic systems, your values are lower compared to the hydroponics, right? And if you want to go really precise in the commercial settings, quite often you can find a lot of different recipes and how much nutrients are needed depending on different growth stages. Here it's a good example on how to use it, right? So the companies of fertilizers will provide you with those. But before we talk about adding fertilizers into the aquaponic system, we first go how it's with the nutrient supplementation in aquaponics. So we know that most of the nutrients in aquaponics are supplied via fish, right? And with the appropriate fish stocking rates, the levels of nitrogen are normally sufficient for the good plant growth. But sometimes such nutrients such as iron, phosphorus, potassium, and magnesium are sometimes insufficient, meaning we have to supplement them or figure it out the ways how we want to deal with this in the aquaponic system. The most important part when we talk about adding any fertilizer to any of the systems is that not all fertilizers for horticulture are suitable for preparing the nutrient solutions. No matter if we are talking about aquaponics or we are talking about hydroponics, because what we need for any kind of soilless cultivation is that all nutrients that are added into the system are completely soluble. While sometimes fertilizers that are used in the soil cultivation have a slow release function, meaning that they will slowly fall apart over time, which is not beneficial in any kind of soilless cultivation system. So we want the nutrients that get completely dissolved. And the easiest way to check is that you just put a bit of fertilizer into the glass and you check if there is still something left after mixing it a bit. So if there is still a big parts left, then do not use these fertilizers going to hydroponic system or aquaponic system. And of course, that you make sure that the fertilizer that you're using do not contain any heavy metals or other components leading to concentrations that could be toxic to the plants or the fish. And especially because at the end, plants or fish would absorb this when we talk about heavy metals, which will actually also be for you at the end, because if the plants will absorb it, you will eat the plants and your body will absorb it afterwards. But because some nutrient deficiencies can still happen when we talk about aquaponics, sometimes we have to supplement it, right? So one of the most common things that we have to add as a nutrient supplementation in aquaponics is iron. Iron, it's not harmful for the fish, but it might change the color of the water. So you normally add it as chelated iron. I don't know how easy it is to get in all the countries that you're coming from, but you also have to know which kind of iron you want to use, because not all the iron chelates are having the same way, when it comes to the pH, they are not available to the plants depending on the pH. And you can see that, for example, the iron EDTA or DTPA, which are commonly used, are available to the plants at much lower pH compared to some others, right? So here you see that this iron is available only at, much higher. So what you want 100%, and the most available for the plants, it's, for example, iron DTP8, right? So this is the one that it's commonly used for the plants, and the plants will take it up really easy. There are some others here. Sorry, here, for example, this one would be available to the plants to much higher pH, but unfortunately, the plants do not like it so much, and it's also expensive. So I would suggest you that you get DTPA or EDTA irons. EDTA colors the water quite a lot, so my suggestion would be to go with iron DTPA when we are talking about our iron. There is also another nutrient that it's quite often missing in the aquaponics system. This is potassium, and potassium can be added as a pH buffer to the system. So if your pH is dropping, which is normally the case in aquaculture systems, so also in aquaponics systems, you can add potassium as a buffer to lift up the pH. However, first of all, if you remember from the webinar that I had on the water quality, you have to add it slowly. You have to observe your fish. You go just step by step. You do not just drop everything in, because you can kill your fish. And potassium can be also toxic to your fish. Meaning, while the tomato, for example, would need the levels of 200 milligrams per liter of potassium, some literature reports that the LC50 value, so for the acute fish toxicity, can be already around 80 milligrams a liter, meaning you add this only if you're really sure that it's missing and you know how your fish react to it. So never just dump anything into the water. And when it comes to the pH, first make sure that you're really, really sure that the pH is at the level that you think it is. So if you measure pH of 10, or if you measure the pH of 3, double check it first before you add anything to the system. And when it comes to the zinc supplementation, it's normally not needed. But the problem in aquaponics can be zinc toxicity, because what happens is that some parts are in the system that you use, as the metal parts, can have a toxic effect, and zinc can be released into the water, right? So it's not such a big problem about the zinc for the plants, but it's bigger problem for your fish. Then we have another nutrient that it's often depleted in the aquaponic system, is calcium. But like we said, that's the good thing if you add the tap water, because with the tap water, you would already get the calcium and magnesium with the water source, right? So that's why when we talk about aquaponics, you try to avoid adding the filtered water, because you lose the source of calcium and magnesium. However, if you see that you have any kind of nutrient deficiencies, they are still same as potassium hydroxide. You can also use calcium carbonate or calcium hydroxide as a supplement, but be careful, because the same as potassium hydroxide, also those will increase the pH. So normally you can add it if your pH drops, but do not just add it and then the pH will jump to 9, and then you will have a happy fish and a happy plants as well of microorganisms, right? However, you see that I try to make it clear that if possible, do not add anything into the system water. So this you do, my suggestion would be, if you really want to make your system efficient and you want to have a big plant cultivation, that you would also aim to have a decoupled system. When you have the systems that you have first the aquaculture part and then the plant part, then when the systems are split, you can add whatever you wish. But in my opinion, first make your fish happy and then make your plants happy. So we always try to make sure that we try to add into the water only things that are really, really, really needed. And before you start adding something into the water, there is also another way of fertilization. It's applying the fertilizer on the leaves. So you can use also foliar application of the fertilizers. And this works quite well for iron, magnesium, and calcium. So since those are quite common nutrients that are deficient in aquaponic systems, you can also spray them on the leaves, but you do not spray them during the midday when it's the hottest, but you spray often during the early morning or late evenings when it's not so hot. There is a lot of different fertilizers that are available, but you always have to check if they are soluble in the water, especially the fertilizers that you get, and make sure that this is really what's missing in your system. And now, the important part, how much should I add, right? You can check online how much is normally needed by plants. And I would say for the aquaponic system, start with maybe 1/4 of what's actually needed or prescribed for the hydroponic system. Meaning, if I have the iron and I find the value that normally in hydroponic systems, you should have around 4 milligrams per liter of iron. I will try to first make sure that I have 1 milligram per liter in my system. I will calculate based on my water volume and then slowly add it to the system. Meaning slowly, first I mix it in a bit of water and then I add a bit, I go back and check my fish. Then I'm really sure that my fish are doing fine. Same goes also for the plants, right? Any small amounts that you add into the system will be already beneficial for your plants, meaning you do not have to just dump a lot of fertilizer inside, but go step by step and see what's happening. You can go old school way, how to calculate that on the chemical way with concentrations and the volumes. There are also some softwares that you can use. A good example is HydroBody that we also use in our lab. There are tutorials on YouTube how to use it, which gives you a lot of information and also already some ideas of what kind of nutrients are needed for specific plant varieties. They are pre-prepared recipes from the literature, from the lettuce to tomatoes and so on, with the target concentrations. And then also you can calculate how much of those nutrients you would like to add into your system. So here I made just an example with iron. And what you have to know for this, it's exactly the content of all the nutrients that your fertilizer has inside. Then it will be much easier for you to calculate. But if you're interested how to use HydroBody, please go on YouTube and check how to use it. I found a few good tutorials that should lead you nicely through how to use the software. So how do we correct nutrient deficiencies? The first things first, it's of course monitoring and documentation. So monitor the pH, electrical conductivity, and if possible, nutrient levels in the system. So if you have fish, you will anyway have the information on the nitrogen. Hopefully you measure it regularly. And then you can just add up also the measurements for phosphorus and potassium, maybe also calcium and magnesium, with the droplet tests, which should be more than enough. And schedule the routine checks to catch any imbalances early. So observe your plants, then you also have enough time to react. You do not have to react immediately, but first make sure that you are sure that this is really a problem. Then you maintain the optimal growing conditions. You ensure that environmental factors such as light, temperature, humidity are within the ideal range for specific plants. When we talk about that, it's the same as I said before. Also, pests can cause that plants look like they have the nutrient deficiencies. So first, eliminate everything else before you start playing around with the nutrients. And this goes mainly for the hydroponics. It's use high quality nutrient solutions. Really make sure that whatever you add to the systems, you really know what's inside. You can also, if once you know that your system always misses iron, you can always add iron every 2 weeks. The same is in one of our systems. What we did often, it's I just pass the plants, and once you get a good idea what's happening in your system, I knew that more or less every 14 days I have to add a bit of iron to my system, meaning when I saw that the plants started to get a bit different color, they did not yet show really nutrient deficiency, I just added the iron into the water. So the first things first, you will learn over the longer period of time how to observe your plants, and you will know what they need and when they need it, right? So if I knew that we were feeding our fish less, then I knew that I have to add a bit of iron into the system. And the same as I was repeating already in the previous webinars, same as on this one, document. So everything that you do, everything you add, everything that is different, and everything that changed has to be written down, because you will forget it in 2-3 days, right? So if you have it written down, then you will make sure that you can check it and trace it back where the problem actually occurred. Maybe it was something else that happened. Maybe you lost some water and that's why the nutrients are missing, and so on. And of course, learn from your experience, right? So if you know the system well, you will be able to predict already what to do. To help you out a bit further, there are 2 really good papers, really well written. They are open access, so you can find them online without problem. One is on the micronutrient deficiencies, and one is on macronutrient deficiencies, and how those nutrients are getting taken up. So I would suggest you, if you're interested more into the macronutrients and micronutrients and deficiencies, how they look like, and how the nutrients are taken up, that you read those 2 papers. There is also one really good book. Now also the 8th edition is already out. It's hydroponic food production system. So if you're interested especially into the hydroponic growing, I would really suggest you to get this book and read every detail of it, where also nutrient deficiencies are described a bit more into detail. So now we go to the homework. So for the ones that would like to get the 2nd level of ELISA certificate, you know that I was talking a lot about how to make our fish safe, and that we do not do anything that would harm our animals. I would be happy if you could calculate me how much iron would you need to add into the system if you would like to have a final concentration of 1 milligram per liter. I will also send you this homework together with the email, so you can read it through, and then you can send me a step-by-step calculation and describe how exactly you would like to then add this iron that you have to add it into the system. So step-by-step calculation and describing how exactly you would add to the system once you have the solution ready. So with this, I would like to wrap up. We discussed a lot. Hopefully you learned something, and that the webinar was interested. And with this, I would like to thank you for your attention. Any questions?
There is one question online that just came in. Very low pH in aquaponics. What form of phosphate do we add? So the first question is, how low is low?
Exactly.
Adelaide.
What's low?
Adelaide asked this. Adelaide Mutune.
Yes, sorry, my phone is refusing to unmute. We are going between 8 and 9.
This is not low.
That's high.
Oh, that's what I call.
We said that we have to keep the pH in aquaponics somewhere between 6.5 to 7.5.
Yeah, so then mine is it's going to 8. So what do we add then?
Nothing.
I mean, well, nothing. You feed the fish more to actually get the pH down. That's the easiest first step to do.
Feed the fish more.
Feed the fish more, especially if you know how it's with the electrical conductivity, if it's not too high, because more you feed the fish, lower the pH will go.
Okay, we have very low EC, so I think we can feed the fish more. Thank you.
Yes.
It helps a lot.
There is also another way. I mean, yes, if you have a high pH in the system, you can also use the phosphoric acid, but this is something that I would really like to avoid to do in the systems. So first go with feeding fish more.
What about you can also strip CO2 to the system to lower the pH. That will make sure that you don't have any other chemicals added to the system.
Yes, but CO2, it's normally the problem if you have a high density of the fish. But if they have really low electrical conductivity, I would assume that there is not too many fish in the system anyway. So the chances of having too much CO2 are also quite low.
Yeah, but CO2 will end up with bicarbonate, so it won't affect or harm the fish as well. It also will increase the salinity, but not that much as you add some other chemicals.
Yes, but normally the CO2, it's a problem when you have too much of CO2 comes in with the fish. So more you feed, more CO2 you have. But if you do not have enough fish or you do not feed enough, also the CO2 will normally not be a problem.
Is it like you're confusing me? I thought when you have more CO2, then you will have more acidic water. Mine is on the other side, more acidic because of the carbonic acid.
Yes, so you have a really high buffer. Probably you have a lot of calcium and magnesium inside, I would say. You have hard water source, maybe?
Not sure about that, but I will determine the elements, particular elements in the water, so that I can be sure of that. Thank you.
There is another question. The Mulder's chart shows some nutrients-heavy antagonistic effect on others. How do you determine the right ratio of nutrients to avoid antagonism?
So I would say the easy way, it's if you have, for example, the nutrient cycles, right? I said that online or with HydroBody, you can already get quite good values of what the plants need, right? You would have to add quite a lot in really wrong ratios that this problem would occur. So if you follow the ratios that you normally have for any kind of hydroponic solution, maybe
I also wrote the recipes for hydroponics actually already consider this. I mean, you won't be wrong.
So for example, right, you have maybe calcium, right, and then potassium, but be careful the way how they are written here. It's because this is not only potassium, but this is actually K2O, meaning it also takes into account the oxygen, right? So the values are much higher. The important part is that you look at those ratios, right? So find the recipes online, and if the values are completely wrong, go into opposite direction, then the chances are high you will have a problem. But go online, check the values. But yeah, hopefully this helps. Any other questions? Amar, I saw before that you were raising your hand.
Sorry, I was raising my hand for the CO2 things and
Aha.
lowering the pH.
Yep.
But I guess it's the best way is to have a pH controller, to a real-time pH controller, and by that you guarantee that the pH will be stable all the time.
Yes, but here I have to say, as much as it's good to have a real-time pH controller, when it comes to the fish, even in our big systems where we have few tons of fish, we
والله ما
do
سمعت وش
pH
بتحكي.
control manually. Because there is one thing that can happen quite fast, is that the controller or the probe stops to work, and then you are gone over the night, and you can kill all your fish through that night. So no matter how big our systems are, and in most industries, they are mainly, those things are still controlled manually. So it's good that you have the probes online that you can see what's the current pH, but adding something in the water, it's safer if you do it manually.
So you
In my
actually
case, I will have
always...
in my case, I will have alarm also. Now we are trying to implement in our system IoT. We will get the measurement, everything on our mobile, and we will, let's say that if there is something happening, we will have an indicator to stop the system entirely.
Yes, but sometimes, especially when it comes to the pH, unfortunately, if the pH goes wrong, you will not even notice that something is wrong, because the measurements will be still recorded correctly. So what we do in our systems is everything is alarmed, also the pH values. But if I have to add anything into the water, especially to increase or decrease the pH, we do it by hand, or I recheck the pH value before anything is added into the system. Because it also happened that there was a problem with the peristaltic pump, and I'm happy there was no fish in the system, but it can go wrong quick.
But I usually it's better to have dosing pump and pulse pumping instead of peristaltic pump, which keep dosing all the time.
Yes, you can do whatever, but from all the industry that I work with, normally they try to do the pH control manually. The only thing what we have that it's automated, it's addition of the tap water. So if the pH is too low, the fresh water will start to flow in automatically, because this is the only pH regulation that I know that it will not kill my fish if something goes wrong.
And also you need redundancy in this system. So if a producer of IoT and whatever, there are people, one should not believe everything they say, because nothing is ever hands off. That's our experience. You need redundancy. You can have a system in place. Actually, Zala also has, and everybody who works on our systems, they have automatic alarms on their apps, on their phones, and they ring in the middle of the night or whatever. But in addition, you do everything, the pH and this most important stuff, you also do manually. So then you also have two different methods to measure something. You can be really sure that it's like that.
And hopefully this helps. I mean, we have a lot of systems, a lot of different systems. We also work a lot with the industry, but when it comes to the pH correction in the system, with most people that I work, they still all prefer to do it manually, except if the tap water is added as a precaution. Because we also measure all the probes, so we have everything online, and we have at least 3 different pH probes in the system that you can check if all of them are fine. And nevertheless, that we have 3 probes in the systems, we still go once a week manually and measure it with additional hand probe to make sure that the pH is really where it should be. Because this is one of the easiest ways to kill the fish, especially if you're not careful. And in these cases, you really do not trust the technology. that everything goes as planned.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
There is a question if we are sending out the PowerPoints. The answer is no.
PowerPoint not, but you will
No.
get the recording of the whole presentation, so you can
Yes.
always go back and check all the slides. No, nothing? Hopefully it was nice. You learned something. I know it was a lot today. And then we see each other in 14 days when Ranka will talk about the plant monitoring and integrated pest management. Thank you very much. And then see you in 14 days. Thank you. Bye-bye.
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 Bye.
Bye. Thank you.